Hello guys, this is Apply Methodology, How to Teach Grammar from Scott Thornburry. So let's start.
Hello guys, I'm Sergio
And I'm Laura.
and we will talk about how to teach grammar.
This presentation is based on How to Teach Grammar from Scott Thornburry. Now let's talk about why is it important to teach grammar. So teaching grammar is very important for us and for our students because it gives them the opportunity to produce correct sentences. Let's take a look to an example. It's raining today and it is raining today. Both sentences give a meaning, but the difference in the correct use of grammar is evident. So we can teach our students to produce correct sentences. Now let's discuss what is grammar. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, grammar is the study or use of the rules about how words change their form and combine with other words to express meanings. Thornburry says that it is important to know the concept of morphology and syntax in order to know what is grammar. In this regard, morphology is the system of rules that covers the formation of words, and syntax is the system of rules that covers the formation of words in a sentence. Considering the information previously mentioned, he states that grammar is the study of the syntax and morphology of a sentence. He also says that grammar is partly the study of what forms or structures are possible in a language. Thus, grammar is a description of the rules that govern how a language sentence are formed. The author also says that grammar is the capacity to recognize the constraints on how sentences elements are changed. Context is an important issue to consider in all fields. So now let's talk about grammar in context. The author also talks about meaning-making potential. So what is it? He explains that the more context, the less grammar. So he says that when you have a context, the grammar is not very important. But on the other hand, the author says that grammar is a tool for making meaning. So at the end, he concludes that both context and grammar are essential and important tools at the time of making meaning. Regarding meaning, the author talks about two kinds. The first one is the representational, that reflects the way we perceive the word, and the second one, the interpersonal, that is reflected in the way we use grammar to ease the task of getting things done. As we all know, grammar is an important skill when communicating, so let's see what is the function of grammar in the language. To talk about the function of grammar in communication, we need to take into account an important key concept. It is the intention. Now let's see why intention is very important in communication. So, for this purpose, let's see the following example. In the sentence, "Can't you please open the door?" we can see that the intention of the speaker is given an order better than asking the person to open the door. But in the second sentence, "Would you mind opening the door?" we can see that the speaker's intention is to ask for the person to open the door in a formal way. So we can see that the person is using a formal language so the person respects the other speaker. Now we can see that the learning of grammatical structures is very important for foreign language because it allows them to know how grammar functions in a language, and it also helps them to communicate properly in the target language. Okay, from your point of view, what is grammar?
Uh, well, I think it's not only my point of view, for many people, in general, grammar is the formal study of a language in all its aspects. You as language students know that that includes many things. It includes syntax, it includes phonetics, it includes morphology, all of those things.
Okay, and now what is the best way to teach grammar?
Well, that depends on your audience. That depends on the kind of students you have. Since you have told me that this is intended for elementary school students, I think that you should not teach it explicitly. You should teach it in an implicit way, not even mentioning the aspects of grammar. But you will have to find a way to cover the grammatical aspects without even mentioning them.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
You are very welcome.
What is grammar for you?
Grammar. What is grammar?
Yes.
Grammar is like the framework we need in order to be understood when we communicate with other people. That's what is grammar for me, like a framework.
Professor, and how is the best way to use grammar? To teach grammar?
To teach grammar, what I think is that we need to teach grammar, first of all, in a meaningful context. So what it means that students need to feel that they have a real communicative need. So it means that grammar is needed in order to be understood. It's not just grammar because we need the structure, no. We need grammar because we need to be easily understood by others. That's do you understand my point? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I mean that students need to understand that grammar has a role in communication. That's it, because you can communicate just with a word, and that's communication. But if you want to be fully understood, you need more, and that's where grammar has a role.
After having discussed the definition of grammar and the different points of view that some professors have, we will talk about why teach grammar. There are 7 arguments in favor. Now let's look at them. The first argument is the sentence machine. It claims that it is good to learn words, but we need to put those words into sentences. So we need rules. The order of these 3 ways of using the sentence machine: we have vocabulary, that is the learn of new words. We have creativity, that is when we go beyond the pattern previous learned. And grammar, that is set of rules. Our second argument is the fine-tune. It helps in intelligibility and appropriacy. Let's look at the example. After speaking a lot time with him, I thought that him attracted me. In this example, perhaps you can understand, but it fails in intelligibility and appropriacy. That is where grammar works. Our third argument is the fossilization. Some researchers believe that those learners who don't receive instruction can get fossilized because they do not use grammatical instructions. Also, they won't improve the use of language. The fourth argument is the advanced organizer. It says that to use the target language, we need first to organize our previous knowledge of grammar in order to be understood. This argument says that we need to organize the language into categories. For example, to learn this is simple present, present continuous, possessive pronouns. When we organize and we put them into categories, the language is easier. The rule of law argument. Since grammar is a system of learnable rules, it lends itself to a view of teaching and learning known as transmission. In other words, you learn a rule and you interact with others, and the rule is transmitted. And our last argument in favor is the learner expectation. It is very important because some students go to class to ensure that their learning experience becomes more efficient and systematic. In other words, they want to learn grammar. Now we will talk about arguments against grammar. Let's look at them. The first argument against is the knowledge how argument. It explains that what we need is not so much grammar. We need also just to pay attention to the language, to the function of the language. In other words, learning by doing. Our next argument is the communication. Let's look at the question. Do you drink? It can be, for example, to invite someone to drink a beer, or it can be just a simple present question. The third argument against is the acquisition. If we acquire the first language without being taught the grammar rules, why so not acquire the second language in the same way? Another argument against is the natural order. It is based on Chomsky, and the idea of an innate universal grammar helps explain similarities in the developmental order of both the first and second languages. Let's look at the phrase "have a nice day." In this chunk, we can replace the word day for "have a nice weekend," "have a nice holiday." So we don't use grammar. Instead of, we use chunks. Finally, we have the learner expectation. Some students want to put their knowledge by practicing and not by learning grammar structures. Now let's talk about grammar now. When teaching grammar, we need to pay attention to forms, spoken language, practice, and meaning, and there is a balance between all of them. Now let's talk about the basic principles of teaching: the efficiency factor, motivation, and appropriacy factor. The efficiency factor is based on economy, ease, and efficacy. The other principle is motivation. We need to make our students to enjoy our class. And the last factor is appropriacy, where we have to pay attention to the age, level, group size, students' needs, interests, material resources, cultural contexts, and educational contexts.
Let's discuss how to teach grammar from rules, a deductive approach. Defining inductive approach. It starts from some examples from which a rule is inferred, and it means discovery. But now, let's analyze deductive approach. It starts with the presentation of a rule, and it's followed by examples in which the rule is applied, and it is about rule driving. A good example of following rules is when cars stop at the red light in a traffic light. Now let's talk about some disadvantages of deductive approach. The first one is that they may be poor enough for some students. So in this case, it's for children because they don't know the grammar structure of a language, so they find difficult to learn the rules. Disadvantage is that explanation is seldom as memorable as other forms of representation, such as demonstration. And finally, it makes students believe that learning a language is simply a case of knowing the rules. Now let's talk about the advantages. So one advantage is that it gets straight to the point, so it could be time safe for people and for students, and also it respects the intelligence and maturity of many people, especially adults. Why? Because adults are more analytical students, so they like a student by rules. Rules and explanations. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a rule is an accepted principle or instruction that states the way things are done or should be done, and tells you what you are allowed or are not allowed to do. Let's see what are the characteristics that a good rule should have. The first one is true. Rules should be true because it compromises in the interest of clarity and simplicity. The second characteristic is limitation. Why? Because rules must show clear what the limits are on the use of a given form. For example, because it establishes what specific topic should the rules follow or should the rules cover. Another characteristic is clarity. Rules should be clear. Why? Because the author also states that lack of clarity is often caused by ambiguity or skips terminology. So we need to pay attention to our vocabulary in the classroom. Let's talk about simplicity. Rules should be simple because lack of simplicity is caused by over-boundary. So we just need to give our students some sections that the learner can remember. Clarity is also an important characteristic because a rule should try to make use of the concepts that are already familiar to the learner. Therefore, students do not get confused. Last characteristic is relevance. It is important because a rule needs just to answer the questions that students need to answer and not to cover extra information.
After having talked about how to teach grammar from rules, we need to know how to teach grammar from examples. But first, we need to remember what deductive and inductive mean. Deductive is when the teacher explains the rule. He tells the rule to the students. It is explicit, but in inductive, the learners are the ones who discover the rule. It is implicit. So, what is inductive approach? Inductive approach is the way that just without having met the rule and with just having had examples, the learner can understand and learn the rule. It is discovery learning, or in other words, a natural road to learning. So discovery learning has three factors: trial and error, feedback and guidance. So as it is inductive, the learner makes many mistakes. So that's why trial and error is a factor. Also feedback. He can get feedback through the classmates, professor, books, and etc. And of course, the learner needs guide, in this case the professor, who will give support and feedback. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of inductive approach. Let's start with the pros. The pros are rules more meaningful, more motivation, and provides autonomy. Rules are more meaningful because they discover the rules. More motivation because as they discover the rule, they think and believe they are doing well. And provides autonomy because nobody is giving them the rules, they are discovering them. Now let's talk about the cons of inductive approach. The cons are: it can become the objective without being the means to learn grammar. Time consuming for students, misinterpretation, and time demanding for teachers. Of course, it is not the objective, because we as teachers cannot give all the time examples to learn, so there must be a balance. Is time consuming for learners? Of course it is. Sometimes it's difficult to know our rules in Spanish. Now imagine to discover them in English. Misinterpretation because sometimes we believe that the rule, we overgeneralize the rule, and sometimes those rules do not work in the way we believe. And it's time demanding for teachers because the process becomes slow. I mean, as it is not explained, so the teacher has to wait after the learners discover the rule. So it's time consuming for the teachers as well.
How to teach grammar to text. A simple word can have different meanings depending on the context it is used. Let's see the meaning of word in the following examples. The first one, what does the word mean? The second one, I give you my word. And the third one, just say the word. In the absence of context, it is complicated to find the intended meaning of a word. So now words out of sentence. The word like have different meanings, but in the sentence I think like you, the meaning is to be similar to another thing. Now sentence out of text. I like the green ones. So this phrase has no meaning for us when it is isolated, but let's see the paragraph. Which pants do you like? I like the green ones. So now it has meaning. Called test. It is the rest of the text that surrounds and provides meaning to the individual language items in the text. The word them has meaning because it is surrounded by some other words. So, like in the phrase, look at them, Claire and Louis are cheating on the exam. So, it has a context. The context of situation. It is the role and relationship of the speakers and the mode of communication. So we use different kind of language when we do a public speech, a letter, a recorded message, or something else. Let's talk about the context of culture. It is when the cultural influences take place in the production of text. For example, St. Valentine's greetings use nicknames to refer to people, but people don't find it rude because this is their culture. Now, we cannot forget that language should not be taught with words and sentences in isolation, but with groups of sentences that form a coherent text. Have a look at the following example. He is playing tennis. This phrase can have different meanings depending on the context where it is placed. In the first example, where is Tony? He is playing tennis. That means that Tony is doing this activity right now. But in the second example, he never wears his glasses when he is playing tennis. Means a complete different thing. Something important to know is where can we find good sources of text. The first one is course book. The second one, authentic sources. The third one is a teacher. And finally, the students. Course book is a good source of text because they are adapted for ease of understanding and displayed specific features of grammar. The second one, authentic sources, retailor the original text that can be difficult to interpret in order to simplify them. The third source is the teacher, because teachers are able or can decide to tell students personal stories, plans, and resolutions or other things, so that means that those texts are authentic and original. Source is the students, because these texts are more likely to be remembered since they are written by the students themselves, so they can better remember the information that they have created.
Now is a good point to talk about how to practice grammar. So there are three factors that we need to take into account. Those factors are accuracy, fluency, and restructuring. Accuracy can be seen as precision. Fluency can be seen as automatization, and restructuring as restructuring. Accuracy because we give attention to the form. In other words, we pay attention to the grammar structures, to the words, to the punctuation marks, etc. No worry about meaning. We just want to be correct when writing or when writing or when speaking or when listening or when reading. So there is not too much attention to meaning. Requires time, of course, because you need to know all the rules, all the words, you need to know everything, so it demands time. Intelligible, of course, because if you are accurate, you are intelligible. People can understand you easily. Also, it needs teacher's feedback for you to know if you are doing well or not, if you are making mistakes, what mistakes you are making. So you need teacher's feedback. Thinking time. If you don't want to make mistakes, you need to think sometimes before what you will say or what you will write. So you need thinking time. And familiarity, because you need to use those words that you already know in order to be accurate. So those are the factors that you need to be accurate. Now let's talk about automatization and its factors. So here we have pre-assembled chunks. Remember that chunks are phrases that are very useful in English. One example could be can be, for example, by the way, at the end of the day, etc. So when you use those chunks, you will sound more fluent. And also we have attention to form but focus on meaning. And we have information gap tasks. We use information gap tasks in order to use the second language. Other factors in automatization are communicative purposes, communicative tasks, authenticity, repetition, and unpredictable elements. Communicative tasks because you need to start being fluent in the second language. And repetition is a key element in order to be automatic in the second language. And finally, we have restructuring. So the factors are to make what you know a bit complex, to put new knowledge into old ones, and it happens in practice. So if you know family members, you can introduce new grammar in order to make it complex. Similarly, new knowledge into old ones, and it happens in practice because it's because of the interaction that you can restruct what you are thinking. For example, you are talking to someone and that person doesn't understand you, so you change the sentence in order to be clear understood. So you modified what you said first and then you change that to be understood.
So now let's discuss how to deal with grammar errors. Okay, now let's see what is an error. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, an error is something done or written by accident that is not correct, not accurate, or does not give the right result. Something to take into account is that language learners make mistakes. So if you make a mistake when you learn or you start learning a language, don't worry about it because errors seem to be an inevitable part of learning a language. Thornburry also talks about different kinds of errors. The author classifies errors into three different categories. The first one is lexical, the second is grammar, and the third one is discourse errors. So let's start with the first one, lexical errors. So lexical errors are mistakes in the way words are combined and also are mistakes when choosing the wrong word for the meaning people want to express. For example, sometimes you feel that you are disillusioned, but when you try to express your ideas, you say that you are disappointed. So it is a lexical error because you are trying to connect those words, but because they are similar, but they are not the same. Now let's talk about the second one, grammar errors. Those are mistakes in verb forms and tenses, and also those are mistakes in sentence structures. Sometimes our students start talking in present and then they mix the tense with and they end up talking in past. So those are grammar errors. And the third one, discourse errors. Those are errors in the way sentences are organized and linked in order to make whole text. For example, in the sentence, I never have gone to that church. So students make mistakes in the word order, since the correct way to say it is I have never gone to that church. Regarding spoken language, there are pronunciation errors. Those are related to the correct or the wrong articulation of the phonemes of a language. The author also talks about two possible causes of errors. The first one is transfer errors, that is the interference of the first language. A good example of transfer errors is the use of the word actually to refer to the Spanish actualmente instead of using currently. Cause is developmental errors, that those are related with overgeneralizing rules. Author emphasizes that correction can provide the feedback that the learner needs to help to confirm or reject a hypothesis. Talk about the attitudes to error and correction. As we know, few people like being wrong, but there seems to be no way to learn a language without being wrong. But some other people think that errors provide students skills to communicate effectively, and they should not be given a sense of failure because they make mistakes. Now let's talk about responding to errors. Author explains that there are two kinds of feedback, the negative and the positive. The negative feedback is when the teacher emphasizes just on the errors of the speakers. Positive feedback is when students are told when they are right. So the author concludes that both kinds of feedback are essential to the learner because positive feedback encourages students to continue learning the language, but negative feedback encourages the student to correct the errors or mistakes that he is making. also something important to take into account is that learners need feedback on their production, and that the choice of feedback strategy will depend on, first one, the type of error, second one, the type of activity, and finally, the type of learning.
Well guys, now we have rules for teaching grammar. There are 6 rules for teaching grammar. The first one is the rule of context. Remember that grammar works at the same time with context. For example, if you want to talk about simple past, you can say, or you can put your students to talk about their childhood. That's context. Now the second rule is the rule of use. That, in other words, is to use real language. Now we have the third rule, that in this case is the rule of economy. It means you don't have to spend too much time presenting the topic, presenting the grammar structure, but you need much time in practice it. Our fourth rule is the rule of relevance. Only the grammar the students have problems with. If they are good at simple present, move on. Continue talking about other topics that you feel they are uncomfortable, and don't repeat, or don't, if they know how to use the verb to be, move on. Change to another topic that you consider they have problems with. Our fifth rule is the rule of nurture. It is a set of conditions of grammar learning that are the input, the output, feedback, and motivation. In other words, it is what happens in the classroom. And finally, we have the rule of appropriacy. In this rule, the teacher decides if he gives a lot or little prominence to grammar, and this rule is based on the other rules.
Well guys, thank you for watching this video. This presentation was based on Scott Thornburry, How to Teach Grammar, and also some information was taken from the Cambridge University.
We hope you have enjoyed the presentation and have learned a lot about how to teach grammar.